Good evening. I'm going to give a commentary on Lecture 20 of the Foundations of Esotericism. These sort of two-thirds of the way through the lectures. We're on Lecture 20, there are 31 lectures, so we're sort of getting to the deep end of this course. And there's some themes that are quite difficult to talk about in this kind of way, so I'll make some commentary but not go too far with it. In this lecture, I've called it Other Entities in the Astral, the Master, White Magic, and the Akashic. So there's some very positive pictures that are given in this lecture. The one towards the end of it that we can start with is that Steiner makes us aware of when we die. Of course, we have the review of our life, and we take with that into the world of the astral world our memories, but as we move beyond that, the astral body can remain as a shell on which can be misused, so to say, in the astral world. And he gives great warning in this lecture that as we do our spiritual exercises and as we start to develop the soul faculties, we have to take great care in becoming very precise about what we see, about what we perceive. We shouldn't just mess around too much because we are very likely to be open to deception and misinterpretation of what we're seeing. So he gives great caution here of how much attention we need to take towards developing the soul senses. He also then talks about how when we sleep, the masters, the astral entities that are of a positive nature, can work ideas into us, and especially those of us who meditate. So there's a very interesting theme for one to consider, that living a life of meditation creates conditions in the astral body that when we are asleep, the masters of wisdom of harmony can bring ideas, influences. He says we can then exercise an influence on the etheric body where nothing at first is experienced by the sleeper, but the master can send thoughts into the etheric body of the sleeper, and therefore we receive into our etheric body pure and lofty thoughts. And then he talks about dreams, two kinds of dreams, which we can also explore a little bit. Dreams that are, what are the nature of dreams and how do you interpret them? So these are the dreams of the masters, but also the dreams, some dreams are just us processing our surroundings or the day behind us, and we need to learn to differentiate that. But I would like to really focus a little bit in on this idea of what is black magic and what is white magic, because it is a theme. And he gives normally we sort of like to focus in on what's black magic, but in this one he does talk a little bit about white magic. And in the experiences that I've had of people describing magic, there isn't black or white magic, there's magic. And how you use it determines on whether it's black or white, or as we will come to see also grey magic. So the difference between black magic and white magic is the source of the power. The source of power of black magic is when you gain the power at the expense of another being. So when you egotistically harm other, quite consciously to gain power, you are beginning to practice black magic. Whereas white magic would be to use the same principles, but in a sense where you're using your own suffering and your own selflessness towards effecting whatever it is that you're doing. So he says no power that is white magic can be gained without selfless devotion. So it flows from the common life force of the universe. So some very beautiful phrases here, for example. The white path is the one which strives for what is common and forms an I in the community. So if you're gaining your power by the suffering of developing the strength of yourself, of your higher self, which you seek outside yourself, as he says, you don't find your higher self within yourself. You have to look above yourself to your angelic being to find your higher self. But the white magic comes when we are learning. He says, for example, the white power we strive to spiritualize the physical dense material, whereas a black magician strives to make denser and denser the physical material towards moon and deadened material. So when we're looking at how we work in the world, those could be inner questions, inner conscience questions. Am I learning to gain my power through my own suffering, through my own journey towards selflessness and my own devotion to things? Am I gaining the power from what is common, so through the strengthening and the awakening of myself in community? Or am I really just working out of egotistical aims, using the same processes to densify, scleroticize and isolate everything? So some very beautiful pictures on here, looking at the difference between the white and the black path in the use of magic. Let's not forget that we all, Steiner says that, you know, the human being has a magical morality in one of his lectures, and so the morality of the human being is actually magical. And he says that this magical morality has everything to do with the spoken word. So that's very much in accord with these lectures. So everything that we speak can either bless or curse. We all know the therapeutic rooms are kind of filled with people who have been harmed by the use of actions. I mean, if we expand that in the use of thought forms, everything that we think, say and do can have a sense of cursing people and traumatizing them, and that's a form of magic in our immorality, we could say, and a black morality. But we also have the power to bless through the power of our word, and that is something that is innately human in us, to have the capacity to have a magical morality in how we use our word, but I'd also say our thoughts and our deeds in our interaction in community. That's a later development of some of these things. So there's some thoughts arising out of this lecture. I'm just trying to see if there's a bit more that we can comment on. Of course, again, one should reread the lecture. There's some alarming pictures of how these astral shells after our death can be used by mediums and people to channel misinformation. But the nice, beautiful thing that he ends with is that, you know, when we die, we have this review of our life, almost like a 3-day panorama of our life. But he also talks about the moment of birth, that there's a complementary process. That as we've been through the spiritual world and we've gathered all the thoughts, desires and wishes and impulses for our next life and our karma, the astral body, as I said in one of the previous comments, comes towards the earth in the shape of a bell, he says, and this bell then seeks the astral body that is in the embryonic phase, and through the amniotic waters, through the placenta, it actually structures the genetic forces and slowly joins the actual astral intentions of our karma with the specific physical manifestation of our next incarnation. And just when that's happening, the entity that is our true spirit self has a preview out of this astral bell that we formed in the spiritual worlds, as it connects with the astral body that is to become our next soul in our next destiny. We get a preview of our life. So we know that there are some children, for example, who can remember these things. They talk about intentions, or they see things and say, yes, that's really important for me to meet in my life. These are previews. So we not only have a life review at our death that we take with us into the spiritual world, but the work we do in the spiritual work also has a kind of an astral content that gives us a preview of courage towards our next life. So that I find that we often, when we're talking about death and birth, we're often talking about, well, when we die, we take all these things across to the spiritual world, and then we sort of run out of ideas of what that looks like. But as we start to imagine what our work in the astral world, or the soul worlds and the spirit worlds, as Steiner calls them here, the mental or the Devachan worlds, that also prepares intentions and actions and places and genders and places and family members. And as we come down to the earth, we get a preview of kind of like a preview imprint. One of the beautiful things that he talks about is that these intentions in the astral world are like a signet ring into the wax of our etheric body and makes an imprint. But for a moment, just as we're preparing for our next incarnation, we have this huge preview of the various things that we need to take with us, and then they become like a galvanized will inscripted into our DNA and the intentions for our lives. So we have these two great portals of birth and death, one taking the fruits of the earthly world into the spirit, but then two at birth, taking the works, the imprint of the works in the spiritual world back into the physical world. Two great portals that we can work with. And I do think that, you know, for those of us who do work on the threshold of birth and death, which is, you know, as practitioners, but all of us meet birth and death, these are great pictures for us to work on how do we take the one world across to the other. So there's some themes for us to look at. How do I work with meditation so that in my sleep the masters can imprint ideas into my astral and my etheric body? How do I work with the portals of death and birth with the memories coming across? But also, how do I ensure that my intentions and my work with the magical morality of our human being works, so to say, in the transformation of the material world ever into the more spiritual, by developing my ego, my I, myself, in union with community. Okay, well, let's move on. Next time we'll go to chapter 21. We're getting into the last 10 lectures of this cycle, which is being quite large. I should have thought about making commentary on 31 lectures, but yep. Anyway, okay, here we go. Cheers. Have a good evening.